Thanks for tuning into the Conscious Hour. This is war, economics, and where the hell are we headed? Listen closely, and I'll add some comments at the end to wrap it all up.
Dramatic stuff. And I think that in part it explains Trump administration's desperation that they're fighting a war they know they cannot win, but they can't walk away. They can't admit defeat. I think that's what it's coming down to. Trump's talk about imposing 20% fees on cargoes passing through the Strait of Hormuz was a foreshadowing of the shakedown that's coming for the Gulf kingdoms. And then I think that they maybe had a second thought about this. It doesn't look good, bad optics there, and probably very alienating for the Gulf kingdoms. So he came up with like, oh yeah, they're going to invest in US economy. So what are we talking about here? The GCC countries have an estimated of about $5 trillion invested in Western financial institutions, their cash and their sovereign wealth asset funds. And this is fully 1/3 of the global sovereign asset money in the world. And so that's a huge amount of money that now the Trump administration is going to be tempted to take. And we know that they have no scruples when the push comes to shove. They're going to make up reasons why, basically, whether they like it or not, the Gulf kingdoms and sheikdoms are going to be paying for this war. And so I think that they perfectly understand this. I have to assume that if your existence is in question, your attention is very sharply focused on ongoing events. I think that MBS, MBZ, all of these leaders in the Gulf can read the writing on the wall. They understand that the United States is an empire in decline. They understand that American protection that they've been paying for is very ineffective. All these Lamborghini, Ferrari weapon systems that look really nice on paper and in perfectly staged conditions don't really work in real war conditions. They're extremely expensive, and the United States is not able to produce them in significant enough volumes to make any difference. At the same time, Iran has been preparing for this for a long time. They are an emerging regional power, and this war is existential for them. So Iran is not about to roll over. Iran is not going to be brought to the negotiating table with bombs. Iran is going to fight to the bitter end, meaning complete eviction of Western colonialist powers from the region. And it's not just Iran at this point. Iran has full support from China and from Russia and from Pakistan and from North Korea. And so I think that the world has understood what they're up against. And if Iran is allowed to fall, everybody might fall. They might be picked off one by one. And so they understand that they need to back Iran. I believe that probably, with the possible exception of MBZ of the UAE, I think that they understand this. And I would be surprised if they didn't have hotlines with the Iranians, saying, look, we can't openly defy the empire, but we want this war to cause minimum damage between us. We want to preserve peace as much as possible between us. And these attacks by the Saudis on Yemen, on Sana'a, I suspect those might be false flag attacks to make it impossible for Saudi Arabia to stay out of the war. They want to push Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Syria and all the Gulf states and Azerbaijan and everybody to unite against Iran, because the United States cannot, or Israel cannot, win that war themselves. But I think it's failing because everybody can see that this is a losing gambit. At the same time, the Gulf kingdoms are in a very difficult position. As I said, they have an estimated $5 trillion in assets sitting in the West. They're probably going to lose it all. And the functioning of their states depends on this money. It depends on having access to this money. So if they lose access to this money, if they cannot pay salaries of teachers and police and their soldiers, they might get overthrown. I think that they're in an extremely difficult position there. But I think that the tide is turning against the Western colonialist powers and in favor of Iran and Russia and China and Pakistan and so forth. And I think that this tide is impossible to reverse, because it's not just the military question, it's also a financial question. And the West is running on fumes. The money is gone. It's all funding with fake money printed out of thin air, which is going to rapidly lose its value. And I think that we're headed into a major financial crisis in the West. And I think that might even be bringing down many Western regimes, like the ones in France, Germany, the United Kingdom. We'll see about the United States, but Trump's political future doesn't look very bright now as well. I think it's existential for China. It's existential for Russia. It's existential for Iran. I would say it's existential for humanity because, to put it in easy to understand terms, defeat of Iran would be an epic victory for the Western Epstein class. Western colonialism has been one of the, if not the most tragic historical periods in the history of humanity. Western civilization has been very pathogenic. It has destroyed 6 major indigenous civilizations around the world. It has killed hundreds of millions of people. And it's not because the character of the average Western man is evil. It's because the Western civilization is based on a certain system of incentives that rewards the worst behaviors and that punishes decent behavior. And so, what we're seeing now play out in Gaza, in Lebanon, in West Bank, and in other parts of the world, because we're not talking about Somalia, we're not talking about Sudan, we're not talking about Congo, but basically creeping genocides are taking place in many, many parts of the world. The reaction to this abuse is now emerging from Russia, China, and Iran, and other powers are probably waking up to this reality and joining in, maybe powers like Pakistan and Brazil, South Africa, to varying extents. And the grand prize is and always has been the Eurasian continent, the world island, as they used to call it. And taking control of Eurasian continent, they would have to take out Iran or make Iran their own colony. First, it would interrupt alternative trade routes. So for the last 200 years, we had a number of choke points around the world. Some of the most important ones are obviously the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Suez Canal, the Hormuz Strait, and the Malacca Straits, particularly what concerns the Eurasian trade. And the Russians have invested heavily as a strategic alternative in the Arctic route, but also in the North-South International Transport Corridor. And that cuts through Iran. Iran is like a major segment in this transport corridor. It goes from the Indian Ocean up to St. Petersburg, from where it can again go towards Northwest Europe. It's quicker, it's cheaper than Suez Canal route. But if you took out Iran, that would be the end of that. It would also be the end of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. It could potentially be the end of BRICS. And then Iran's very considerable military power and its 92 million people under a Zelensky type of Western puppet, Iran could become a tremendously destructive force in the region. So for that reason, I think that it's in the interest of collective humanity everywhere in the world that Iran prevails and remains a stable, sovereign, independent country. And I think that the same ideas are guiding the policies of countries like Pakistan and China and Russia. And I think that even these Gulf kingdoms are becoming increasingly aware of this. The Saudis understand that if Iran falls, they might keep some of their billions of dollars in the Western financial institutions, but they might lose their country because Israel has clear designs on a huge chunk of Saudi territory and Iraqi territory and Syrian territory and Turkish territory and Lebanon and Egyptian territory. They all see this.
So the bottom line is Netanyahu is the one that's causing this incredible problem we have. Well, of course, Trump, because he's compromised and everybody in Congress is compromised. That's why they've been funding Israel forever. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The best thing for Trump to do is walk away from it. Walk away from it. Walk away from it. Let the economy do what its thing. Let the East Asia, let them figure out how they're going to work together. And say goodbye to Netanyahu. Cut the ties, Donald Trump. You don't need to do anything else. Just walk away. What, are they going to kill you? You're going to die anyway because your health is shit. So you either die early or die a little longer. Either way, you're going to die. So what do you want to do? Blow the world up? Screw up the world economy? Tick tock, tick tock. The countdowns begin. Please leave your comments. If you've got a way out of this, let me know. What else do you want to know about that is troubling you and trying to figure out what's the equation? How did we get here? How do we solve the problem? It's the Conscious Hour, folks. It's your Conscious Hour. You got a solution? Bring it forward. Thanks for tuning in.